Hello and welcome to Undivided. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your commitment to giving Common Sense a comeback. I was telling Nicole, I don't hear anything right now. We'll figure that. You figure that out over there. Hopefully everybody can hear me. Coming up on the show today, we're going to talk about another violent weekend in Washington state, which should give lawmakers pause to consider what they worked on this legislative session when it comes to quote-unquote gun violence, because whatever they did, which was a lot, has not reduced quote-unquote gun violence in our communities. Also, later on, we're going to discuss this absolutely absurd warning from the NAACP that you shouldn't travel to Florida if you're black. It's a huge stretch, but I don't even know. I should have put that in unbelievable today, but honestly, when it comes to the NAACP, all the things they could actually legitimately be focusing on, absolutely insane. I'm also going to play part of our clip with State Senator Joe Nguyen, who joined us for Sundays with Subscribers. If you haven't watched it yet, you really should watch the interview. Joe Nguyen is a progressive, one of the most progressive members of the state legislature in Olympia. He and I talked about what else, Senate Bill 5599, which he was a co-sponsor of. I'm going to play a clip from that, but our whole conversation was 90 minutes, and it was really something to behold. All right, first, Nicole, hello, how are you? How was your weekend?
Hey, my weekend was great.
Good.
We were busy.
I still can't hear anything in my ear.
I'm not sure why everybody says everybody else can hear.
So I'm just going to be deaf all day.
I don't know why.
That's all right. That's okay. That's what I can expect for a Monday.
But yeah, we had a busy weekend.
Yeah.
And I'm a little sore from our cleanup. I didn't expect to be that sore. I think it's a little bit sad that I'm that sore, but it was good.
Yeah, we're going to talk
about
some
muscles.
We're going to talk about that today too. This litter pickup we did for Seattle's One Day of Service, which they do like once a year, and people come out by the hundreds and volunteer their time to clean up trash and graffiti, which is great. And I loved seeing some undivided subscribers there. Loved it. Although it is not a replacement for competent government.
Exactly.
And the layers of literal crap, needles, filth that we cleaned up out of this park should have never been allowed to get to that point in the first place. No. I mean, truly disgusting. So while we were happy to take part, while we're a little sore today, while I loved seeing some of you, we never should have had to be there cleaning up yards and yards of layers of filth. Absolutely disgusting.
I know, but it was fun to see everybody.
Yeah, it was. All right, before we dive into that, let's get to the violence over the weekend. And this is not a surprise, and you're only going to see it get worse as the summer months begin. There were a few things that happened this weekend, a few big headlines, and we can't even get to all the violence that happened, but there were 3 drive-by shootings on highways, which it sounds like at least one of them was definitely a road rage incident, but some of them sound a little gangy to me. Here's the article from Fox 13. WSP investigating 3 drive-by shootings in 2 days on King County Freeway. So that's freaking terrifying. And then I'm sure you heard about this. There was this street racing event, which those aren't exactly a safe place to be to begin with. This happened in Kent. And there were 5 people injured in a shooting at this illegal street racing event. And there is some video. The guy commentating in this video is an interesting fella. He doesn't seem too terribly concerned that there's gunfire all around him. Here's this video from the scene of this shooting at the street racing event.
Damn, man, y'all always ruining a good night. All these goddamn pit. Oh, shit. That was close. Oh, shit. Oh, where my security at?
Where's the security at? You mean police who Democrats scared away from the state with their vitriol, yeah, that's where the security is at. I also have to laugh at him like, oh, you guys know how to ruin a good time. Okay. Was it really a surprise that somebody committed a shooting at this event? There was also, and this is very serious, so I shouldn't joke around, there were two women, female bartenders in Federal Way who were shot and killed leaving work overnight, Saturday into Sunday. So that's horrifying. There was also a guy who was injured, did not die. 3 suspects sought after South Seattle 7-Eleven robbery, robbed at gunpoint. There was a guy shot, I think this was in Everett, right, Nicole? Was it Everett? Yeah. With the police shooting?
Yes.
Man shot and killed after opening fire on officers who were trying to serve him a warrant in Everett. And the reason I'm detailing all of these, and I read the comments, and it's so funny how you guys, we're like on the same wavelength, because I'll be thinking something and then I'll read the comments and it'll be exactly what I was thinking. I thought that when they banned so-called semi-automatic assault rifles on an emergency basis in Washington state, meaning that's the law right now, that was going to improve this quote-unquote gun violence. You know, lawmakers in Washington state, even though it's just blatantly unconstitutional, saying, oh, we need to get rid of these weapons of war, we need to make sure people don't have these in our communities, and they passed it on an emergency basis with the thought that it would help right away, right? If it's an emergency and you're going to sign it into law, and the moment the governor signed it, it's supposed to help things. It's not going to help anything. And look, could a ban on AR-15s, on the future, sale and purchase of AR-15s, could it help prevent a shooting, a mass shooting in a public place at some date and time uncertain at some point? Maybe. I can't predict the future. I can't predict what would have been, could have been, might be. What I can tell you is that we have shootings happening that are killing people right now. And we've had these shootings happening that are killing people for the past several years at increased frequency. But when we talk about the gang violence, which we can attribute a lot of this to, when we talk about the young men who are being killed, again, at record numbers on our streets, that has been happening. That is happening. That's not some hypothetical situation. And so when you look at where lawmakers focus their time and energy this past legislative session on trying to get this political win for the headlines of banning weapons of war, banning semi-automatic assault weapons, maybe it helps your future political campaigns, maybe it helps Bob Ferguson with his campaign for governor, but right now, it's not doing anything to stop the bloodshed. It's not doing anything to stop the shootings and the killings that are happening with increased frequency on our streets. It might make you feel good, made you feel really great about yourselves. And again, might there be in the future an instance where someone would have committed a mass shooting, but they can't because they couldn't buy one of these weapons? Sure. But again, I don't know. I can't tell the future. I don't know what would have happened in some alternate reality. But you are completely disconnected from the reality that we're living in right now. And, on top of going for this big salacious win when it came to semi-automatic assault weapons and banning them, not only were they not focused on where the bulk of the shootings are happening and with what firearms the bulk of the shootings are happening with, and what people, gang members, but they were also, and Democrats for the past few years have been actively proposing and pushing legislation to take it easy on people who are actually today committing crimes or killing people with guns. I know I keep bringing it up, but it's one of the most egregious examples. 2 legislative sessions ago when you had Democrats introduce a bill that would have reduced the penalty for drive-by shooters who kill someone. So again, you can ban all these weapons of war on an emergency basis while completely ignoring the active crime emergency and contributing to it getting worse. It's just so completely disingenuous. So whenever you have, and even if you think that regular citizens should not have access to, as an example, an AR-15, even if you believe that, and I know there are some people watching and listening who do, that does not jive with the other actions that they're taking or not taking when it comes to preventing deaths, that are caused by someone with a gun. So if you care about quote unquote gun violence, you should be demanding to know why elected leaders aren't doing more to address the more common occurrences of shootings and killings. Because mass shootings are incredibly rare, as much as they take up so much of the attention from the news media. And look, they're incredibly serious and sad. And I think there's a lot going on in this country that has contributed to them, including the mental health crisis of youth. And it's not that I think that we should be ignoring mass shootings, but we know that they account for an incredibly small percentage of people who are shot and killed with guns in this country. And to have Democrats not only actively ignoring those other instances because they don't create the big flashy headlines, but actually proposing and passing legislation that makes it less likely that people who kill someone else with a gun are going to be held fully accountable for that. I'm sorry, but that's incredibly disingenuous. It's not a political issue. It's not a party issue. And so to me, again, I think if you're a true advocate for public safety, you're a true quote unquote gun control advocate, or you want to reduce shootings, you really ought to ask lawmakers what's going on there, because there's just no moral consistency. Okay, I want to get to a story on homelessness. We've been talking about the King County Regional Homelessness Authority, which I've come to believe is useless. I've come to believe it's truly useless. So this was sold as this end-all, be-all for our homelessness crisis. That instead of having these differing approaches that different cities would handle it in different ways, you would look at it as a regional issue, which I think is smart in principle. The concept of it is smart, to say, let's get together as a region, let's work on this together. We know homelessness doesn't just stop at the border of one city to another. So they formed this King County Regional Homelessness Authority, and it has been a complete and utter failure. I mean, the homeless crisis isn't any better now than it was when it formed. We have seen story after story about mismanagement. For instance, the story that the Seattle Times did not long ago talking about how the Regional Homeless Authority wasn't even paying contractors on time. So the people who are actually out offering these services, they're like going into debt, using up all their savings, using credit cards to try to stay afloat because the King County Regional Homelessness Authority cannot fulfill its basic function of making sure that service providers are paid. And then, of course, last week, Mark Dones, the CEO of the Regional Homelessness Authority, announced he was going to resign. Was getting paid $247,000 a year, and even he walked away from the job probably because he realized that they weren't doing anything and it was a complete failure. Well, now the Seattle Times, I thought this was interesting. Danny Westneat, a columnist over at the Seattle Times, he puts out this op-ed, and I love the simplicity of the headline. What's the point of the Regional Homelessness Authority? And I could not agree more. And actually, I think it's a good thing that the Times is now questioning it, because you also look at the salaries, how much of the money given to the Regional Homelessness Authority is going into these big bloated salaries. All it has become is another cog in the homeless industrial complex, where we're paying people six-figure salaries and to an agency that cannot even fulfill its core function. And so anyway, Danny Westneat gets into this interesting moment where Seattle officials were talking about the progress they've made in getting people out of these tent encampments and into shelters, and saying that they've reduced this citywide by 42%. And then a city council member speaks up and says, yeah, but isn't the Regional Homelessness Authority supposed to be doing that? Why? So you have cities that are still working on their own to try to deal with these issues, when the idea was that you would delegate that work to a Regional Homelessness Authority that would make more progress on a regional scale. And keep in mind, this is an authority that wants a tenfold increase in its operating budget. For what? For what? What have you shown us? What have you done to prove that you're making a difference, that you're doing what you said you were going to do? And they haven't done anything. So now they have no CEO. Oh, and I will look for any excuse to play this clip again. I'll also remind you of the type of people that the Regional Homelessness Authority has working for it that should instill zero confidence in us that they can get the job done. You remember the co-chair of the Continuum of Care Committee for the Homelessness Authority yelling at another member who spoke up about a sex offender being nominated to be on the board?
This is about equity. And everyone deserves housing. I don't care if they're a sex offender. I don't care if they're black. I don't care if they're indigenous. I don't care if they're a criminal. I don't care if they're coming out of jail, prison. Everyone deserves housing.
Okay, Shanae, we got you.
No, it's not okay. That's the point.
Yeah, it's not okay that you're a co-chair on that board. There was a call from I was actually proud of the Regional Homelessness Authority for asking that woman to resign for absolutely losing their mind in defense of a sex offender. And then she's like resisting, so I don't know what they're going to do with her. I mean, you could just fire her. So anyway, I'm glad the Seattle Times is now saying what needs to be said, which is, what is the point of the Regional Homelessness Authority? If they are just going to be another cog in the homeless industrial complex, and cities are still left trying to deal with this issue on their own, then they do not need to be giving millions and millions of dollars to some big bloated government bureaucracy that's just pissing it away. So welcome to the fight, Seattle Times. Good to have you here. Okay, I want to play, I loved this episode of Sundays with Subscribers. We had on State Senator Joe Nguyen on the show, the Sunday show we do that's exclusive for subscribers every week. He's one of the most progressive lawmakers in Washington State. He's a Democrat who represents White Center, the area around White Center. And he was also a co-sponsor of Senate Bill 5599, which we talked a lot about on the podcast, which I think is government-sanctioned kidnapping of kids. It essentially allows kids of any age to run away to a shelter, say, I'm here for protected health care, whether it's gender care or reproductive care like abortions, and that shelter under the law cannot tell that child's parents where they are. And I just think that that is wrong. And so Joe Nguyen and I, we sat down for 90 minutes. I highly recommend you watch the interview. But I want to play for you just a little clip of our back and forth about some of my concerns and some of the criticisms over Senate Bill 5599 and his support of it.
Nothing in this requires the state to do anything as it relates to taking kids away, right? Some of the things that we've heard in some of our testimonies. And the irony is, and you've kind of alluded to it too, is where you heard the testimony. So oftentimes some of the people who are saying that this is about parents' rights, well, just based off of the hyperbole that I'm hearing on my tweets, on my emails, some of the very vitriolic and very vile language that I receive as just a sponsor of the bill in public, I can't imagine what's being done, in private as well.
Do you think it's possible that in your efforts to do what you say the bill is intended to do, that you could be cutting out loving parents who just have some concerns about their child getting that kind of protected health care?
If it was, well, no, because I don't think that it prohibits young people from being able to work with their parents to figure out a solution as well.
But if they want to, the kid can't.
Yeah, there's nothing that prohibits them, and there's nothing that forces them to go anywhere. The state's not doing anything. It's certainly in a case where, okay, you're now in a situation where there's a young person who is unhoused, who needs care, who has potentially been exploited, can't get access to something, right? So none of this is trying to take kids away from their homes. It's only after something happens, we're trying to provide a network of support to get them in a spot where they can get some help.
But when you say something happens, that could be a parent just telling their kid, I don't want you to get X protected health care. And that could be something that happens and a kid ditches it to a shelter. And then their parents are like, where's my kid?
So
I feel like your bill assigns the worst intentions to parents. When I think there's a lot of parents who want to talk through it with their kids and don't want their kids to have an option to run away to a shelter where the state won't give them their physical address.
Well, and the way that this conversation is even going is kind of to the point, right? So it's funny, we had another conversation online about gun control that I'll bring back up later.
Yeah.
I'm trying to protect young people who don't feel safe and who are oftentimes unsheltered and the highest rates of either trafficking or abuse or violence and even suicide. So my goal is to protect young people in some of their most vulnerable moments of their lives. Mm-hmm. That's my goal. If in certain cases where there happens to be a very loving parent who got into it with their young person and they can't figure it out. I'm like, okay, potentially, but my goal is to help this young person become stable, feel safe, so that they can become in a mindset where they can actually get the services they need and hopefully reunify with their family. That's literally one of the intents of the bill. That's why they have to go to DCYF. That's why we want to make sure that they have these provisions in place. So it's just a matter of who we're trying to serve. And in this case, the problem that I see isn't that there are loving families that have kids running away. No, the problem that I saw was that there are kids who are running away because they are not in a safe spot and they need help.
Yeah, but there are some people who would say, why do you think it's your job to do that? I mean, it's not physical abuse that we're talking about.
Sometimes
no.
it is. I mean,
But then there are laws for that.
That's right.
There are already laws for physical abuse. So what you're talking about really is disagreement between a parent and a child, albeit disagreement on a serious issue, protected health care. But to me, the bill almost equates, because before this law, before 5599, if a child were to run away from home and show up at a shelter,
Yeah.
there was like really only one instance where they wouldn't tell the parent where the kid was, and that is if they were abused.
Yeah, signs of abuse.
So now there's two. It's protected health care, signs of abuse. So to me, now you've likened a parent who's physically abusing their child to a parent who didn't want their kid to get gender care or an abortion.
Well, I think the context that's missing is that the level of vitriol towards especially transgender youth is at a height that I've never seen before. If you look at the rates of suicide or even ideations of suicide amongst that specific demographic, it is at astronomical levels as it relates to the general population. There is actual harm that is actually happening today, whether it's self-inflicted or imposed on them as well. So that's why it's so important, is that people are actually dying because of whatever dynamic that is happening at home.
But I asked you a couple minutes ago, do you think that someone is a bad parent if they don't support their child getting that kind of care? And you said no.
Well, I don't think they're a bad parent, but that's not my goal in this bill. My goal is to protect young people who feel as if they're not in a safe space.
And what would you say to people who see that as you believe you can parent better than they can?
Fine.
So that's part of my conversation with Washington State Senator Joe Nguyen on Sundays with Subscribers. If you'd like to watch the full 90-minute conversation, you can sign up, learn how to become a subscriber at undividedpod.com. That's undividedpod.com. I really love our Sunday conversations. Joe and I also talked about race, racism, criminal justice issues. So it was a fascinating conversation. Really enjoyed that. All right, coming up next, we're going to talk about this litter cleanup we went on over the weekend. And how it was great. Loved doing it. Loved meeting some of you, but it shouldn't have been necessary. We'll discuss that. But first, are you looking to sell your home? If you are, why would you not sell it with our friend Wes Jones over at sellwithwes.com? He and I chatted about what he can do for you that a traditional real estate agent might not be able to.
We have programs in place to help you prep your home. We can help cover your repairs and even cosmetic upgrades where you can pay for those at the closing table. We have a flexible commission structure. We have the absolute best marketing that you're going to find of any real estate agent. And there is a lot of programs and different things that we do that I go pretty in depth with on my website. So you can start by going to sellwithwes.com and go to the Sell a House feature, and you can go under some of the different programs that we have to learn a little bit more. If you want to check out your home's value, just plug in your address there. And if you want to book a consultation with me, just give me a call. My cell phone is there on the website, and it's super low pressure. I'm going to tell you the truth if this makes sense, or it doesn't for you, and I'm going to treat you fairly.
Yeah, gets his cell phone out there. So if you are curious whether it's the right time for you to sell your home, I know the market has been all over the place. Wes will be great and just give you some good advice on what you should do, and also can talk a little bit about what he and his team at Wes Jones & Associates can do for you. So visit sellwithwes.com. That's sellwithwes.com, a better way to sell your home. Okay, let's talk about our litter pick we went on. This segment is brought to you in partnership with our friends over at Future 42. Turn your frustration into action at future42.org. Make sure to sign up for their newsletter so you can get alerted to opportunities to show up, to reach out to lawmakers, to push back against unreasonable policies. All right, so Saturday was the one day of service in Seattle, and this was something started by Mayor Bruce Harrell last year. And look, I think it's great. It is an opportunity for hundreds and thousands of people to get together, to beautify neighborhoods. Sometimes it's planting flowers, sometimes it's painting over graffiti, or picking up trash. And we went out with We Heart Seattle, which is unDivided's charity of the year, and they are a great citizen-led organization that does this year-round. So this was just another day for them. But for one day of service in Seattle, they decided that they were going to pick up trash at an abandoned encampment in a long, otherwise beautiful green space on Queen Anne Hill in Seattle. In fact, it was just down the street from where I used to live. And this is for those watching the show, this is a picture of what it looked like before we got to work. And it was genuinely disgusting. I mean, this is in one of the most beautiful neighborhoods in Seattle, in what should be a green space that people can enjoy. It was absolutely disgusting. And so we had sent out an all call for unDivided subscribers to come. Many of you did. I was happy to see you there. And you had, I think, 100 people who came in to, over the course of 2 hours, clean out this space. And I will tell you, so many layers of trash and filth that it was almost like it had become part of the earth. And I don't know how long ago this homeless encampment was abandoned, but all measure of things. Some things that were obviously stolen. There were a lot of needles that had to be picked up. There were some areas where it was very clear it was being used as a bathroom. Just layers upon layers of tents and clothing and all measure of things. And again, I think it's a wonderful thing for community members to get together and want to make their city or their neighborhoods a better place. And I certainly don't ever want to act as if that is not a noble task and a noble thing to do. And like I said, We Heart Seattle does that all year round. And I know it's very difficult work. I think my frustration after having been down there was that it shouldn't have been necessary. When I looked at the layers and level of filth in this beautiful green belt, I couldn't help but wonder to myself how long that homeless camp was allowed to be there to get that bad. And in a city like Seattle, we should, in a city that pretends to care about the environment and love the outdoors, it should never have been allowed to have a homeless camp there in the first place. But to have a homeless camp that was clearly allowed to fester for so long that it took 100 people 2 hours to clean it up. And, you know, when I kind of reflect on the day, I couldn't help but come away from it thinking that City Hall is really what needs to be cleaned up in Seattle to avoid those situations. And, you know, even the same goes for all the graffiti that people painted over on Saturday, etc. Awesome. Shouldn't have been there in the first place. You drive around Seattle, there's graffiti on freaking every single surface. And so I think the message is for Seattleites who do care, for Seattleites who came out, I think there were thousands who came out all around the city because they care about the city, because they want it to look better, because they want it to be better. The very best thing that you can focus on cleaning up right now is not graffiti, is not garbage, it's the Seattle City Council. And there are 7 seats that will be on the ballot in November. 7, including 2 that have incumbents running. No incumbent should be allowed to keep their job this year. No incumbent should be allowed to keep their job this year. And I really hope that those who came out and participated realize that not only did the city need a little fresh paint and a little litter removal, but it needs the removal of some politicians who have allowed this to happen, who have fostered this sort of environment, and who have contributed to the downfall of what is a truly beautiful city. So again, I appreciate everyone. What is the saying? Many hands make light work. Many hands didn't even make light work in this situation because it was that absolutely disgusting. All right, this segment was brought to you in partnership with our friends over at Future 42. Turn your frustration into action at future42.org. All right, let's get to our segment, Unbelievable. There was an article in the New York Times. It was an opinion piece. And the headline of it was, "Not every pandemic needs someone to blame." And my first thought was, gosh, we're still talking about the pandemic. I thought the pandemic was kind of behind us, but apparently it's not. And it was written by a woman who works in healthcare, Dr. Daniela Lamas. She's a pulmonary and critical care physician at Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston. So great. You know, I always appreciate the perspective of those who serve others in healthcare. And when I first read the headline, I thought it was going to be about how, we don't need to we don't need to blame like China or anything like that. Let's just move on. But I will say her piece itself was pretty nuanced, and I didn't hate the piece itself. I'll read this little passage. She wrote, "The pandemic is waning, but there will be another one. I want to say that we will learn and we will be different, both at the bedside and out in the world. I want to say that we will give grace, that we know how assigning blame only tears us further apart. But then I look at history. I think about our perception of the unvaccinated. I think of the stigma that so many diseases bring with them, how little we want to acknowledge the role of luck and random chance. I have to wonder, when the next pandemic comes, who will we blame?" And really, she did get into, in I thought a pretty honest way, how we vilified people who didn't want to wear masks. We blamed people who were hospitalized with COVID, that it must have been something they had done. We vilified, and by we, none of us, certainly not me, society and the media and Democrats vilified the unvaccinated. Our governor vilified the unvaccinated. So I appreciated in the article the fact that she really did want to acknowledge that there had been blame and vitriol placed on people for things like not getting the vaccine and not wearing a mask, and how if you didn't do those things and you were hospitalized, it was your own damn fault. So I don't want to criticize the article entirely because I thought it made some good points. But what I will say is that I don't think that there have been a couple articles nationally that have looked to kind of, let's move past all the hate and the vitriol and the anger from the pandemic. Let's move past the fact that we had elected leaders, vilifying people for their choice over the vaccine, and neighbors and families that were torn apart because they disagreed on the pandemic. And I've seen some publications like the New York Times that I think perpetuated those divisions now suddenly say, let's not be so quick to blame next time. But I really think that there is this kind of unbelievable effort to rewrite history on the COVID-19 pandemic and to really quickly want to move on from something that impacted our lives so profoundly, not just when it comes to the health aspects of it, but when it comes to people who lost their jobs, people whose livelihoods were stolen from them by the government, people who, I alluded to Governor Inslee earlier, who were called bioreactor facilities, who were compared to domestic terrorists for not getting the vaccine. And I really do not think that the climate around the next pandemic, because there will be one eventually, I don't think we can expect that to be any better until there is a full mea culpa for what happened during the past pandemic. Until you have politicians like Jay Inslee who are willing to come out and say, look, I said some pretty strong things about the unvaccinated, about Trump supporters, who he referenced frequently, and I want to apologize for that. I want to apologize for the small businesses that we forced to shut down, for people we put out of work, because in hindsight, it wasn't necessary. I want to apologize for the dedicated public servants who I fired because they didn't get a COVID-19 vaccine, even though we now know that it wouldn't have prevented the spread of the virus. So as much as I can appreciate the thought that, hey, we need to do better the next time. We need to not be so hateful and vitriolic. We need to not be so quick to rush and to assign blame. Well, I can appreciate that. I do think it's truly unbelievable that we are going to let politicians off the hook or we're trying to let politicians off the hook and just saying, hey, let's move on and everything is great, when you have too many politicians who have not accounted for the decisions they made that truly hurt people and impacted people's lives in a negative way. So an interesting article, if you care to read it, in the New York Times. I think there's some good points in there, but I'm not ready to move on until there is a full accounting of what happened. Okay, coming up, the NAACP says Black people should use caution when traveling to Florida. I could have put that in Unbelievable today too, because that is absolutely unreal. But first, have you taken the First Mark Challenge yet? I've been encouraging you on the show to do it. My fiance and I have done, and really reassess our insurance. We went through the First Mark Challenge, firstmarkinsurance.com, if you want to go through it yourself. And what they did is they took a look at all the insurance we already had, home, car, etc., and decided, were we undercovered, overcovered, were we paying too much, and came back to us with a recommendation for what service providers we should change to, what insurance we should change to, and we ended up taking their advice, becoming members of the First Mark family. And Dave Taylor says, even if you do the First Mark Challenge, which costs you nothing, you will still get something out of it. Here's Dave Taylor, the CEO of First Mark.
We believe and we say that we will help 100% of the people that we work with. Okay. Now that doesn't mean necessarily that 100% of the people we work with are going to become First Mark clients, but we believe that we will actually help 100% of the people, whether that be stay with your current carrier, but let's modify your coverage a bit so you're better protected, or ultimately, hopefully come over to First Mark. We're going to put you with a different company and give you better coverage, right? So the challenge is really challenging individuals to give us an opportunity to prove that to them. That's really what the First Mark Challenge is.
Yeah, and Mike and I gave him that opportunity, and now we're members of the First Mark family. And the nice thing is, at the end of the day, it just costs you a little bit of time. What's the worst? The worst thing that could happen if you take the First Mark Challenge is you just end up keeping the insurance that you already have. Or you could save a bunch of money. You could, like Mike and I, get way better insurance for about the same price. So try the First Mark Challenge. Visit firstmarkinsurance.com. That's firstmarkinsurance.com, and let me know how it goes if you take it and if you decide to become a member of the First Mark family, like Mike and I are. Okay, dipping outside of Washington State for a moment. Oh my God, the NAACP. So the NAACP, and you're going to see so much more of this just unbridled hatred of Florida as Ron DeSantis announces his bid for governor this week. So this is the headline from CNN. Beware, your life is not valued. NAACP travel advisory warns Florida is openly hostile toward African Americans. Let's just set aside the fact that Florida has one of the highest percentage per the population of African Americans in the country. I would really wonder if they feel that way if they continue to live there. But the NAACP issues this travel advisory, saying it's in direct response to DeSantis' aggressive attempts to erase Black history and restrict diversity, equity, and inclusion programs in Florida schools. And to be clear, I have railed against DeSantis for, I think, going a little too far in the culture wars, sort of like the opposite of woke is like woke sister, when, you're, I talked about this with some of the parental rights aspect where he wants to just outright ban certain gender care for minors, when I'm like, look, that's just a different page, the same book of what they're doing in Washington State when you're taking away the ability of parents to make these decisions with their kids. But that being said, here's a part of the NAACP statement. Florida is openly hostile toward African Americans, people of color, and LGBTQ plus individuals. Before traveling to Florida, please understand that the state of Florida devalues and marginalizes the contributions of and the challenges faced by African Americans and other communities of color. They go on to say, talk about Florida banning critical race theory, et cetera, et cetera. What is this for? You show me one person, even though the wokest, like a Black Lives Matter activist, you show me one person who, if they were invited to a beach vacation in Florida, would be like, I can't go. The NAACP has a travel advisory for Black Americans. Nobody's paying attention to this. It's absolutely, it's just a political point. I think that's very clear. But I also find it very interesting how the NAACP is also kind of lumping in, we think they're hostile toward African Americans, but also the LGBTQ community, which I guess if you're talking about LGBTQ plus Black Americans, I guess that the NAACP would speak for them. But you are going to see more and more stories like this that have like just an outright demonization, vilification of Ron DeSantis. They're going to be more and more frequent, especially after he enters the race. And this is just absurdity. I can't imagine anyone who would actually pay attention to a travel advisory sent out by the NAACP. Also in national news, South Carolina Senator Tim Scott launched his presidential bid today, and this was kind of expected. I like Tim Scott. I thought he put out this kind of live video, and he held an event to announce his candidacy. Here's a clip from the event that he held earlier today.
America is the greatest nation on God's green earth. And our greatness doesn't come from politicians. Doesn't come from the government. It comes from we the people. We the people. This can't be another presidential campaign. We don't have time for that. We need a president who persuades not just our friends and our base. We need a president that persuades. We have to do that with common sense, conservative principles. But we have to have a compassion for people. We have to have a compassion for people who don't agree with us. We have to believe that our ideas are so strong and so powerful and so persuasive that we can actually take it to the highest points in the world and be successful. But we also have to be able to take it all the way down to places that today are hopeless and prove that who we are works for all Americans.
I love that. I love what he said there. And especially when it comes to the importance of persuasion. I think there are too many political candidates who have just abandoned efforts at persuasion. And they just sit there and they speak into their echo chamber. And he's absolutely right, particularly when you're not the party in power, with Republicans trying to recapture the White House. Persuasion is part of the game. You can't just speak, you have someone like Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis, and you have to ask yourself, can they persuade swing voters? Can they persuade independents and moderate Democrats? I get crap all the time from more conservative Republicans who don't like that I'm invited to speak at some of these Republican events because they're like, well, why would you have an independent speak at a Republican event? Well, it's because there are some people within the party who understand that you cannot win without addition. You cannot win in a state like Washington unless you figure out how to persuade independents, how to persuade moderate Democrats. And that is what Republican presidential candidates need to do, is they have to focus on persuasion. And they have to, as he said, believe in their ideas so much that they can convince other people that those ideas are what's best for the country and what's best for them individually. And so I like that that is where Senator Tim Scott is starting his presidential campaign, with the understanding that we cannot run a campaign that just speaks to our echo chamber, that just speaks to our supporters. We have to run a campaign that is actively reaching out to people who we need to convince. And so, again, I don't know if Tim Scott is going to have the fundraising behind him. Certainly, there's already a lot of big Republican donors that have kind of committed to Trump or committed to DeSantis. But I think someone like him is going to be valuable to the race, if not for anything else, to convince other candidates that, hey, he's right on this. We need to reset our way of thinking. And the base is behind us. We already have the base. The uber conservatives, they're not going to, even if we just blow it, they're not going to vote for Joe Biden. We have them. Doesn't mean we don't care about them. Doesn't mean it's not important to appreciate our supporters. But in order to win, we have to pivot. We have to talk to Americans who are in the middle, Americans who are undecided, swing voters, moderate Democrats, reasonable, rational Democrats. And we have to get them on our side too, and that's okay. So South Carolina Senator Tim Scott will be watching his campaign and what comes of it. All right, coming up next, we're going to get to your questions and comments. Sure, it's lively today. It always is on Mondays. Nicole's like, yeah, it's lively today. But first, eastsideweightlossclinic.com. It was so funny. We were at this litter pick over the weekend, and at the end of it, I end up like encircled by women who are like, tell us about the Eastside Weight Loss Clinic. And I was like, well, it's a tough diet. It is a very strict diet for 60 days of your life, but I lost more than 30 pounds in the first 60 days of the Eastside Weight Loss Clinic plan. So while it wasn't easy, it wasn't magic, it obviously paid off. And I'm feeling just great. And the other thing I was telling them is if you start now and you want to cut some weight before summer, then this is a great plan for you. It's a great program for you because the payoff is so instantaneous. So my advice would be to schedule a free 15-minute consultation with Dr. Ryan Coogan, and you can just do that at eastsideweightlossclinic.com. eastsideweightlossclinic.com. There'll be a little calendar where you can schedule it. You can let them know, hey, we heard about this on the Undivided podcast with Brandi Kruse. Again, it's not magic, but the nice thing is there's no prepackaged meals. You're eating real food every day, so you don't have to worry about there's some programs out there where it's like you have to buy their prepackaged meals, and it's like, do I have to do this for the rest of my life then to maintain weight loss? That's not the way it is on the Eastside Weight Loss Clinic plan. You get to eat real food. There's no counting calories. There's no weird hypnosis or anything like that. So check it out, and if you do it, let me know how it goes. I've heard some great stories from some of you who have lost 15-20% of your body weight on the program, which is awesome. Okay, shall we get to comments? Nicole, you want to jump in for comments today? Up to you.
Oh, sure, I'm here.
Okay, great. The cleanup. Jean says, the cleanup definitely left me feeling, hi Jean, thanks for coming. The cleanup definitely left me feeling sore, but completely amazed at how much was accomplished in 2 hours. A lot. But
it is impressive how much, a lot of hands can get a lot done in 2 hours. But again,
shouldn't have
why
been
are we there?
necessary. Yeah, and I should also mention Olga Sagan was there, who's running for Seattle City Council, and Raul Garcia, Dr. Raul Garcia, who's running for governor. It was so funny. He brought his, I think it was his mom and his aunt.
Yes, his mom had just arrived from Miami.
I was like, oh my God.
She's not going to think Seattle's.
I was like, what kind of son are you? He brought his, they're in from Miami, and the first place he takes them is this trashy punk queen hat. I get it. He's running for governor. I'm glad he's out, shaking hands, kissing babies, picking up trash. But they were like a little older,
Yes. There was a lot of age range there. There was lots of people every age.
Yeah,
there.
but his mom and aunt were they were in the dirt with their tools, and I'm like, good for you.
I know. I'm kind of feeling bad for them because of how sore we are, and to be even older and maybe use those muscles even less than we do.
Yeah.
I hope he's treating them well.
Well, and I saw this comment on Patreon from Daniel, who said, hey, Brandi, glad to see you and Nicole at the We Heart Seattle cleanup over the weekend. I didn't have a chance to say hi since you were both hard at work like everyone else, but I hope to see you again at another volunteer event. Daniel, you didn't say hi to us?
I can't believe it.
How could you not say hi? Man, that's a bummer. Yeah, we had to leave a little early because we're going to Emerald Downs. I'll talk about that in a moment. So we had to get out, shower, get changed, and then leave. So we didn't have a chance to at the end thank everyone for coming and mingle. Kathy, they will never fix the homeless situation because they make too much money because of homelessness. Would love to see the data on how much are actually from this state. Yeah, there's always this disagreement. People are like, no, these are our former neighbors. It's like, okay, have you actually been out to encampments and talked to people? But speaking of Emerald Downs, and I'll post some pictures of this on social media. This was so nice. So Emerald Downs held a race on Saturday afternoon called the Dory Monson Memorial Purse. And it was in honor of our friend Dory because he loved to bet on the ponies. It was a beautiful day. His wife Suzanne was there. I had a great day. Did you win anything?
I ended up pretty close to even, maybe within $5 or so. Yeah. Dory's friend, Matt Johnson, who helped kind of arrange the whole thing. I just handed him money.
Oh, so you didn't win. He won money for you.
So he picked some winners.
Yeah.
For me.
Dory, I have a picture of Dory over here. You let me down, man. Because it was funny, Paul Moyer, Dory's friend Paul Moyer, we, on the Dory Monson Memorial Purse, I didn't read any numbers. I just Dory, I was like, speak to me. So
we didn't get there early enough to go test out his theory.
Of look for the horse that just took a poo.
Right.
Yeah. But I was like, okay, there's one, I think it was something called something Meteor, stuck out to me. It was horse number 5. And then Paul Moyer was explained that he picked horse number 5 And it was like based on kind of like a feeling and a hunch. And I was like, oh my God, that's it. That story's speaking to us. And then we lost. So it's like,
none of us won that race. I think, Jeanette's friend. She's the only one
of our
that
friends.
out of our whole group. And his daughter had bet on every pony except that
oh
one.
gosh, yeah. So Travis wrote, I wasn't able to get to Emerald Downs for the Monson Memorial. I hope that it becomes an annual event. That would be really fun. But we were down in the winner's circle, which was a cool experience. And the owner of the track came over and chatted with us. He was just so nice. So we were so grateful that they did that. And I thought it was just good for the family too.
They played some of his memorial video. They played a little cut from Wyman and Moyer at the service. It was really cool, really special.
Very sweet. All right, Deborah, on the shootings that are happening. Gun laws will never stop gun violence. Yeah, unless you have gun laws where you're literally going to go strip every single person in America of their guns. Which there'll still be some. Well, first, don't do that. Please don't do that. But yeah, they're not getting to the underlying reasons. Chris writes on Patreon, if government was only incompetent, that would be a huge step up from the corrupt government we currently have. That's true.
Good point.
Incompetence is actually better. Matthew writes on my interview with State Senator Joe Nguyen. Joe Nguyen is the state senator for my district. No one on his staff ever returns my calls regarding bills he supports or his stance on an issue. The one response I got via Twitter was sarcastic. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. I like Joe. So that bums me out. Because I hear varying levels of success people have when they reach out to elected leaders, but that bums me out. Jenny Graham, Representative Jenny Graham, hi. Thank you, Brandi. You're hitting the nail on the head on the issue and what the legislature should be focusing on. As a lawmaker, I'm grateful for the community conversations that you facilitate. Let's see. And then she also commented on Joe Nguyen when I said, like, what would you say to parents who consider this bill as you saying, like, the government can parent better than they can? And his answer was, well, fine.
That was what got people real riled up.
Yeah, so Representative Graham says, fine. It's fine to tell a parent that lawmakers are better parents than the actual parents. Nope, it's not fine. The state is interfering and nobody is being held accountable when things go sideways. The fact that the senator ignores the individuals online telling their stories of detransitioning and the consequences of uninformed life consequences is telling and unacceptable. And again, I never looked at this as, we have not shied away from the transgender youth conversation. I personally would not allow my child to do any sort of life-altering surgical intervention. But I also don't think it's the government's job. I think that should be a decision between a parent, a medical professional, and a child. And I know there are people who are like, how can you say that? That's like mutilation. That's my opinion. It's the reason I was against the COVID vaccine mandates. It's the reason why I'm pro-choice. I believe in limited government intervention in our lives. And I try to be very, very consistent on that issue. Travis writes, his fine should chill every parent in the state down to the marrow. Oh, there was a lot of people who said this.
Oh,
Aaron, fine. That answers all that needs to be said. These are the days I'd be all good with medieval. Oh, Nicole, don't put those comments in there.
Sorry, I missed that.
It was like a borderline threat. Nick, I'm sorry, but the state's senator's smug and condescending answer of fine is one of the reasons me and my family are leaving Washington, but I'll never leave undivided. Thank you.
Isn't that sweet?
And again, I hope you will watch the full 90 minutes with the senator and I give him a lot of credit for coming in. Because it's not like we hid what we wanted to talk about. He knows I was vehemently opposed to 5599.
He even mentioned that his staff told him
his
not
staff
to do
was like,
it.
why are you doing this? So I do appreciate Senator Nguyen for that reason. And I know there's a lot of Republicans that he works well with. We also talked about some of his colleagues like calling me racist. That was like the first 10, 20 minutes of our conversation. And I actually really enjoyed it. There was this segment of the interview where I said something and he's like, well, that's racist. And at the end, we're like, gosh, maybe I should edit that out. But we didn't. I left everything in, unedited. So definitely check it out.
Because after you explained it, he said, okay, I understand what you're saying.
Right.
But it comes off that. But, well, you should always listen to the context. Don't just go based off of, a couple words without listening to the context.
Yeah, because there was this, and I'll just repeat it here, and then it'll be, but there's this feeling that there's like the criminal justice system has a disproportionate impact on people of color. And I said, well, I think that might be because communities of color, you have a disproportionate amount of crime. And he's like, well, that's racist. And I said, but I think it traces back to slavery. And I really do believe that when you have generations of Black Americans who were not able to build generational wealth, and that when you have communities that are more impoverished, of course, there are going to be higher rates of crime. So I think that blaming it on like, oh, racist cops is a really cheap way out. I think there's much deeper societal issues that go back to slavery and what's happening in this country. So that was sort of the answer that I had. And he's like, okay, yeah, our take on that is mostly the same. Okay. All right. Great comments today, guys. Let's get to our closing sanity check, shall we?
You got to give me a second when you do that.
Sorry. I didn't have anything specifically penned in for sanity check today, but it kind of ties back to Tim Scott announcing his presidential campaign and the fact that we're really going to start to see all of this wind up in a pretty meaningful way, both with the presidential race, the race for governor in Washington state, and, you know, we all have to decide who are we going to support, etc. I mentioned that, you know, I'm going to speak, I think coming up, I'll mention these on the show so you guys can come to some of these events that I'm speaking at if you want to, but I'm speaking to the Kitsap County Republicans Lincoln Day dinner. I think that's coming up next Friday. And I know that there are going to be people in the crowd who are like, why do you have Brandi Kruse, who's not a Republican, speaking here? And I'm sure that there are going to be things that I say that some staunch conservatives in the room disagree with. I hope that that's okay and everybody can understand where I'm coming from. But I really think that as we look at candidates and as candidates enter the race, the idea that Tim Scott put out there about, hey, we cannot just speak to our echo chambers. We have to be about building consensus, about convincing people, about the art of persuasion. And I really want you to pay attention to what candidates are focused on persuasion and are focused on the idea of addition and bringing more people into the conversation, trying to persuade people that their ideas are the better ideas, not that the other side has bad ideas. Because you can do that all day long. You can point to, if you're a Republican candidate, all the terrible things Democrats are doing at the border, in our communities, with policing, with law and order. And look, I get it. We need to discuss those things. But I tend to gravitate toward candidates that are also focused on persuading people that their ideas are the best and explaining why. And so I think that just for the sake of our sanity, as we enter this really, really busy campaign season, be open to being persuaded, be open to considering other points of view, and be open to asking yourself and trying to understand where the other side is coming from. Like State Senator Joe Nguyen, when he came on with us. I would bet that a lot of you just vehemently disagreed with a lot of what he said. But if you can better understand and allow yourself to want to understand where the other side is coming from, that can help with your attempts at persuasion. And so just keep that in mind. Get out of the echo chambers. We don't want candidates who are stuck in echo chambers either. Those are not the best candidates, I think, for public office. All right, that has been today's episode of Undivided. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for your commitment to giving common sense a comeback. A quick note about tomorrow. So we are going to have a show tomorrow. It'll be a little shorter than usual because I'm racing off to Walla Walla. Oh my God, I hate the drive to Walla Walla. I love Walla Walla, but I hate the drive. So I've got to race off to Walla Walla tomorrow for a speech. And so we'll probably be maybe around like a 40-minute show tomorrow. So we're going to fit a lot in a shorter amount of time. But again, thank you for being here. Thank you for your commitment to giving common sense a comeback. A special thank you to Undivided subscribers. If you'd like to become an Undivided subscriber, you can find out how to support the show for as little as $5 a month at undividedpod.com. That's undividedpod.com. And please go watch that interview with State Senator Joe Nguyen, all 90 minutes. You won't regret it. It will be time well spent. I will see you guys on the live show tomorrow.